Properties that do not comply with the owner-occupancy requirement must be listed for sale within 90 days. I read the sentence. Twice. Then a third time. Sell. Not fined. Not warned. Sold. I stared out the kitchen window at the Smoky Mountains behind the cabin and tried to figure out what I was missing. I'd owned that place for 4 years. The mortgage was current. The property taxes were paid. The HOA fees had never been late. My tenant still had 8 months left on her lease. The board knew that because 6 months earlier, they had approved the renewal themselves. So I called the property manager. She answered immediately. Before I could even read the notice out loud, she let out a long sigh. You got one too? That was the moment I realized this wasn't a mistake. I asked how many owners had received the same letter. There was a pause. Then she lowered her voice. Enough that my phone hasn't stopped ringing all morning. One owner had already moved out of state for work. Another relied on the rental income to cover medical bills. Nobody understood how the board could suddenly force people to sell homes they had legally rented for years. The letter included no vote count, no legal opinion, and no explanation. Just a 90-day deadline. And one sentence near the bottom of the page. This policy applies to all properties, regardless of prior approval status. Carter Whitaker pulled the thick black binder from the shelf beside the fireplace and dropped it onto the kitchen table. The sound made his dog lift its head from the rug. Every owner at River Ridge Preserve received the same binder at closing. CC&Rs, bylaws, architectural guidelines, parking rules, pool access. 12 years of HOA paperwork. Carter flipped through the tabs as fast as he could. Nothing. No owner-occupancy requirement, no restrictions on long-term rentals, no language giving the board the power to force a sale. He opened his laptop. The community portal loaded slowly. He downloaded the latest version of the governing documents, then the version before that, then the archived copies. By the time he finished, the kitchen table had disappeared beneath stacks of printed pages. His cabin had never been a problem before. Every lease renewal had been approved. Every HOA fee had been paid. The management company had accepted every assessment payment without question. Until that morning. Carter opened the River Ridge Facebook group. Normally, it was where neighbors complained about bears getting into trash cans or asked who was fixing the gate keypad. Today, the page moved too fast to read. Screenshot after screenshot of the same notice. One owner had relocated to North Carolina for work. Another relied on rental income to help cover medical bills. A retired couple had purchased their cabin specifically as a long-term investment. Nobody remembered voting on the rule. Nobody could find the amendment. Then Carter saw a comment that made him stop scrolling. Board members are still renting their cabins. 3 minutes later, the comment disappeared. Another homeowner posted that the HOA president's brother leased 2 cabins inside the community year-round. That comment disappeared too. People noticed immediately. The conversation shifted. Nobody was asking where the rule came from anymore. They were asking who the rule actually applied to. Carter refreshed the page. An administrator had locked the thread. A few seconds later, a new post appeared. Please avoid speculation until official guidance is released. A retired couple had purchased their cabin specifically as a long-term investment. Official guidance? The rule was already being enforced. What guidance was left to release? His inbox chimed. Another email from the management company. No amendment attached. No vote count. No legal opinion. No explanation. Just a reminder that compliance deadlines remained unchanged. 90 days. Carter called the management office. After 27 minutes on hold, someone finally answered. He explained that he couldn't find the owner-occupancy rule in any governing document. The woman sounded exhausted, not defensive. Exhausted. The board recently adopted the policy. When? I'm not able to provide that information. Was there a vote? I can't comment on board procedures. Can you send me the amendment? You'll need to submit a formal records request. How long does that take? Up to 30 business days. Carter looked back at the notice on the kitchen table. 30 business days. 1/3 of the deadline would be gone before he even saw the documents. An hour later, he drove to the management office outside Knoxville. The receptionist accepted his paperwork without surprise. That bothered him. As she handed him the receipt, Carter asked one last question. When was this approved? She glanced at her screen and shook her head. I don't have access to that information. Not confidential, not restricted. She simply didn't know. Carter walked back to his truck and looked at the mountains beyond the parking lot. For 12 years, River Ridge Preserve had sent him reminders about trash bins, deck stains, and parking permits. Now they were telling him to sell his cabin, and nobody could explain why. Chapter 2. The Exemptions. By the next morning, Carter's records request still showed as pending. The River Ridge Facebook group looked different, too. Half the posts from the night before were gone. Entire conversations had disappeared. The screenshots of the 90-day notices were still there, but every comment asking how the rule had been approved had vanished. Only one post remained pinned to the top of the page. Please direct all questions to the management company and avoid speculation. Avoid speculation. Carter refreshed the page again. Nothing changed. His coffee had gone cold by the time he noticed a private message request. The sender was Lisa Bennett. They had spoken a handful of times over the years. Wave from the driveway neighbors. Nothing more. Her message was only 4 words long. Don't post here. Call me. 10 minutes later, Carter sat alone in his truck outside a grocery store parking lot, while Lisa spoke in a low voice. She had received the same notice. So had several owners she knew. What bothered her wasn't the deadline. It was who hadn't received one. The night before, she'd driven through the neighborhood, making notes. Cabin after cabin had lights on. Families cooking dinner. Cars in the driveway. Children's bikes leaning against porches. River Ridge had always been a mix of full-time owners and long-term tenants. Everyone knew that. The board knew it better than anyone. Lisa lowered her voice even further. The cabin at Lot 14 still has tenants. Carter wrote down the address. That's Carol Ann Fletcher's brother. Lot 14 wasn't on the compliance list. Neither was the cabin near the south entrance owned by a board member's husband through an LLC. Nor the property overlooking the creek with a Florida mailing address. All 3 had tenants. None had received notices. At least, none that anyone was willing to admit. Carter stared at the addresses written across the yellow notepad on his dashboard. For the first time since opening the letter, he stopped wondering whether the board had made a mistake. Mistakes affected everyone. This didn't. Before ending the call, Lisa mentioned something else. 6 weeks earlier, the board had held a special meeting. Nobody she knew had attended. Nobody remembered receiving notice. But according to one of the maintenance workers, several owners had been there, including the people whose cabins weren't on the list. When Carter asked where the meeting had taken place, Lisa hesitated. Then she said something that made him sit up straighter. It wasn't at the clubhouse. She ended the call before he could ask another question. Back at the cabin, Carter opened the county property records website. He typed in the first address, Florida mailing address. Second address, LLC ownership. Third address, Carol Ann Fletcher's brother. Every property Lisa mentioned had one thing in common. Someone connected to the board benefited from the new rule. His phone buzzed. Emily. A white SUV had driven slowly past the cabin twice that morning. The second time, it stopped at the end of the driveway. The driver never got out, but Emily watched him raise his phone toward the house. No logo on the vehicle? Carter asked. No. Management company? I don't think so. After they hung up, another email arrived from the HOA. Owners subject to the new occupancy requirement would soon receive compliance inspections. No dates, no explanation, no details about what inspectors would be looking for. Just another reminder. 90 days. Carter looked at the yellow notepad one last time. 3 exempt properties, 1 closed-door meeting, 1 name that kept appearing. Carol Ann Fletcher. What else had happened at that meeting? Carter saw the first real estate sign before he reached the clubhouse. It stood beside a mailbox halfway up River Ridge Drive. 3 days earlier, the cabin hadn't been listed. Now, a moving truck sat in the driveway, while 2 teenagers carried cardboard boxes down the front steps. Their father loaded them into a trailer without looking up. Nobody waved, nobody smiled. Carter slowed down, but kept driving. At the next intersection, he saw another sign. Different cabin. Same local real estate company. Same bright red lettering. By the time he parked outside the clubhouse, he'd counted 3. River Ridge had gone almost 2 years without a single listing. Now 3 cabins were for sale in less than a week. Lisa Bennett was already there. So were 5 other owners. Nobody bothered with introductions. Everyone carried the same letter. Everyone had the same deadline. 90 days. A retired couple leased their cabin to longtime tenants who had lived there for nearly 8 years. A man named Chris had moved to Nashville for work and depended on the rental income to cover his mortgage. Another owner had signed a new 12-month lease less than 3 months earlier. The HOA approved every one of those agreements. Now, the same board was acting as if those arrangements had never existed. Nobody talked about legal options. Nobody mentioned attorneys. They talked about money. How much would they lose? How quickly would they have to sell? Who could afford to wait? The retired couple had planned to keep their cabin for another 10 years. Chris couldn't afford 2 mortgages. Another owner had taken out a home equity loan 6 months earlier. Every story sounded different. Every problem ended the same way. Sell. A golf cart rolled slowly into the parking lot. Carol Ann Fletcher sat behind the wheel. Doug Hensley sat beside her. Neither looked surprised to see homeowners gathered together. Carol Ann smiled politely. Doug folded his arms. The golf cart stopped a few feet away. "If you're here to discuss the notices," Carol Ann said, "please submit your concerns through the management company." Nobody moved. Lisa stepped forward. "People are packing their homes." Carol Ann nodded, as if she had expected that. "We understand this transition is difficult. Transition. Not families, not savings, not retirement plans. Transition." Chris pointed toward the ridge where the moving truck was still visible. "That family's been here for 20 years. Doug shrugged. "The market changes." Carol Ann looked around the group. "This community was built for homeowners, not investors." Carter stared at her. Every person standing there owned their cabin. Every person paid HOA fees. Every person followed the rules they agreed to when they bought. Carol Ann knew that. She simply didn't care. "If you care about your property values," Doug added, "you'll understand why this matters." Nobody answered. Because everyone standing there cared about their property values. That was exactly why they were scared. A woman standing beside Carter finally spoke. "My realtor told me not to list right now." Carol Ann's smile faded for the first time. The woman continued. He said too many cabins are hitting the market at once. Nobody said a word. The retired couple exchanged a look. Chris lowered his eyes. 3 listings this week. More notices going out. More owners preparing to sell. If Carol Ann wanted to protect property values, why was she flooding the market? Doug shifted in his seat. Carol Ann glanced at him briefly before turning back to the group. Temporary fluctuations happen in every market. Fluctuations. Another word that sounded harmless. Another word that cost people money. We've already voted on this, she said. Then she turned the golf cart around. Meeting over. Discussion closed. As they drove away, Carter noticed something strange. Doug wasn't looking at the road. He was looking at the for sale signs, counting them. Back in the parking lot, nobody spoke for several seconds. Then Lisa opened the folder she had been carrying. Inside was a plain white envelope. No return address, no company logo. Just her name written across the front. It arrived yesterday. She pulled out a business card, a local real estate agent. On the back, someone had handwritten a note. If you're considering selling, I'd love to discuss your options before your property hits the market. Chris reached into his jacket pocket. He had one too. The retired couple looked at each other. They had received 2 calls that morning. Different agents. Same question. Had they considered listing early? Carter looked down at the business card spread across the hood of Lisa's SUV. The notices had gone out on Tuesday. The agents started calling on Wednesday. One owner pointed toward the ridge where the moving truck had been parked earlier. How many more signs before prices start dropping? Nobody answered, because everyone standing there already knew the answer. Carter looked back toward the road where Carol Ann's golf cart had disappeared. If this was really about protecting property values, why did it feel like someone wanted them to fall?
Help us grow. Join to Suburban Verdict.
The next violation didn't mention rentals. It mentioned parking. Emily found the notice taped to the cabin door when she got home. No envelope, no signature, just a printed form with one sentence highlighted in yellow. Vehicle patterns inconsistent with owner occupancy. Carter read it twice, then a third time. What does that even mean? Emily pointed toward the driveway. Her car sat in its usual spot. Nothing looked different. The notice included 4 dates. 4 times the HOA had documented a vehicle registered outside Tennessee remaining overnight. One of the dates was easy to explain. Emily's sister had visited from Atlanta. Another was Carter's work truck, registered to his company address in Kentucky. The other 2 dates made even less sense. No photos, no times, no explanation. Just a warning that repeated violations could trigger additional compliance inspections. Carter looked back toward the road. The white SUV suddenly made a lot more sense. By lunchtime, the River Ridge Facebook group had exploded again. Not publicly, privately. Owners had stopped posting comments. Now they messaged each other directly. Lisa sent Carter 3 screenshots. Different notices, same language. One owner received a warning because 2 vehicles stayed in the guest parking area for 3 consecutive weekends. Another because a Florida license plate had been seen outside a cabin 6 nights in 1 month. A third owner was told that inconsistent parking activity raised concerns about occupancy compliance. Nobody understood how the board was tracking any of it. Then Chris called. I think I know. 20 minutes later, Carter met him outside the clubhouse. Chris held a folded sheet of paper. He'd requested copies of his violation history from the management company. Most of it was blacked out, but one section remained visible. Parking log. Dates, times, license plate numbers, vehicle descriptions, observations. Carter read one line twice. Blue Ford F-150 observed overnight. Occupancy status requires review. They're keeping records? Carter asked. Chris nodded. For months. The parking lot behind the clubhouse overlooked the visitor spaces. From where they stood, Carter could see Doug Hensley sitting in a golf cart near the entrance. Clipboard in one hand, coffee in the other. Watching. Not talking. Not greeting neighbors. Watching. A silver SUV pulled into a visitor spot. Doug wrote something down. Chris let out a short laugh. Not because it was funny, because it was absurd. They're using parking spaces to decide who gets to keep their home. Doug looked up. For a second, his eyes met Carter's. He didn't look embarrassed. He waved. Then he went back to writing. An older couple walked toward the clubhouse carrying grocery bags. Doug stopped them. Friendly smile, easy conversation. Then he pointed toward their car, asked a question, wrote something else on the clipboard. The couple nodded and walked away. Carter watched the entire exchange. Nobody argued, nobody raised their voice. That was the disturbing part. Everything looked normal, almost helpful, until you realized what was happening. Doug wasn't managing parking. He was building cases. Emily called again. The Reynolds cabin just dropped another $20,000. Carter turned toward Chris. How much below asking? $35,000. The cabin had been listed for 6 days. 6 days. 2 price cuts. A family who had lived there for 20 years was now competing against 6 other forced sellers. Carol Ann kept repeating the same promise. Higher property values. But every new notice created another listing. Every listing created another discount. Every discount lowered the next offer. Chris folded the parking log and slipped it back into his jacket. My mortgage balance is $438,000. Carter looked at him. My realtor thinks I'd get $420,000, maybe less. $18,000. Gone. Not counting closing costs, not counting commissions, not counting the years he'd spent fixing up the cabin. Just gone, as if none of it mattered. Doug climbed out of the golf cart and walked toward them, still smiling. Chris didn't wait. If I sell at $420,000, I still owe the bank money. Doug didn't even hesitate. Individual financial situations can't dictate community policy. Chris stared at him. Doug shrugged. If you bought expecting guaranteed appreciation, that's not the board's responsibility. Then he walked away. Carter looked down at the parking log in Chris's hand. Dates, license plates, visitor records, months of notes. If Carol Ann and Doug already knew exactly who wasn't owner-occupied, why were they still sending more notices? The first cabin sold 11 days after the notices went out. Nobody expected it to happen that fast. The Reynolds family had listed at $469,000. 6 days later, they dropped the price. Then again. The final sale price never appeared online. Just one word: pending. By Friday afternoon, the moving truck was gone. The porch lights were off. 20 years in River Ridge had disappeared in less than 2 weeks. Carter drove past the cabin on his way back from town. A contractor's trailer sat in the driveway. 2 men unloaded boxes of flooring. One carried fresh paint samples. The new owners hadn't even moved in yet. They were renovating. Across the road, another for sale sign had changed to under contract. Then another. 3 cabins. 3 sales, all within days of hitting the market. One property had been listed for less than 72 hours. That night, Lisa called. You need to see this. She sent him screenshots from the real estate listings. The same buyer's agent appeared on all 3 transactions. Different cabins, different sellers, same representative. Carter zoomed in on the company name, Smoky Peak Property Group. He'd never heard of it. Neither had Lisa. The next morning, another owner joined their call. Mark Ellison. He'd accepted an offer the night before. All cash. No inspection contingency. No financing. No negotiation. Just a 7-day closing. They offered $28,000 below asking, Mark said. Why'd you take it? Mark laughed quietly. Not because it was funny. Because he looked exhausted. I got the compliance inspection email this morning. Silence. Everyone understood. The longer he waited, the more cabins would hit the market. The more cabins hit the market, the lower the offers would go. Carol Ann had created a countdown, and every owner knew it. My mortgage balance is $438,000, Mark said. The offer was $420,000. Nobody spoke. $18,000. Gone. That didn't include agent commissions, or closing costs, or the money he'd spent renovating the kitchen the year before. If he sold, he wouldn't walk away with a profit. He'd walk away with a bill. By noon, the River Ridge Facebook group was full of rumors. A local investor, a vacation rental company, an out-of-state developer. Nobody knew who was buying, but everyone knew the same thing. The buyers weren't waiting. They were ready. Almost as if they'd known this was coming. Carter drove to the clubhouse. Doug sat in the golf cart near the visitor parking lot, clipboard on his lap, watching cars, counting spaces. Business as usual. Carter walked over. 3 cabins sold in less than 2 weeks. Doug shrugged. That's the market. Cash offers below asking? Doug took a sip of coffee. Some owners prefer certainty. Carter pointed toward the Reynolds cabin. They lost money. Doug didn't even look. Real estate involves risk. If Mark sells, he'll still owe the bank. Doug shrugged again. Individual financial situations can't dictate community policy. The answer hit Carter harder than he expected. Doug wasn't denying the losses. He was accepting them, as if they were necessary, as if they were part of the plan. If you bought expecting guaranteed appreciation, Doug added, that's not the board's responsibility. Then he looked back at the parking lot and wrote something else on his clipboard. Business as usual. His phone buzzed. A text from Lisa. 1 sentence. Check the buyer mailing addresses. Attached were screenshots from county records. 3 different cabins. 3 different LLC names. 3 mailing addresses. The same post office box. Carter looked up from his phone. Doug was already driving away. The golf cart disappeared around the corner. 3 forced sales. 3 different companies. 1 mailbox. How many buyers were there really? Lisa arrived at Carter's cabin before sunrise. She didn't knock. She stepped onto the porch, holding a folder and a laptop. You were right, she said. There aren't multiple buyers. Carter moved aside and let her in. Within minutes, the kitchen table disappeared beneath printouts. County records, property transfers, LLC registrations, closing dates. Everything pointed back to the same place. The same post office box. The same buyer's agent. The same company. Smoky Peak Property Group. Lisa opened her laptop. I searched the business records last night. The company hadn't existed very long. Smoky Peak Property Group had been registered 7 weeks earlier. Carter looked up. The special board meeting had taken place 6 weeks earlier. Neither of them said anything. They didn't need to. The buyers existed before the rule, not after. Before. His phone buzzed. Chris. They're at my cabin. 20 minutes later, Carter pulled into Chris's driveway. Doug stood beside the golf cart, clipboard in hand. A management company employee photographed vehicles parked near the garage. Chris waited on the porch steps, arms crossed, jaw clenched. They said they need to verify occupancy. Doug smiled politely. Routine compliance review. Chris pointed across the road. The Reynolds cabin sat wide open. Workers carried new cabinets through the front door. Fresh paint cans lined the driveway. Nobody photographed their cars. Nobody checked their license plates. Nobody asked questions. The rules only seemed to matter before the sale, never after. Doug noticed Carter watching. The board has a responsibility to protect the community. Carter glanced back at the Reynolds cabin. 3 cabins sold, 3 renovations already underway. The neighborhood looked less stable than it had 2 weeks earlier. Doug followed his gaze. Change always feels uncomfortable. Then he wrote something else on the clipboard. Another note, another check mark. Business as usual. By lunchtime, another rumor spread through River Ridge. A 4th cabin had accepted an offer. All cash, 5-day closing, 10% below asking. The owner canceled the weekend open house. There was no point anymore. Lisa called while Carter drove back from town. I talked to the listing agent. What did he say? He thought you already knew. Carter tightened his grip on the steering wheel. Knew what? The investors contacted him before the first notices went out. Silence. He said they wanted to know which owners might need to sell quickly. Carter pulled onto the shoulder. When was this? About a month ago. A month. Before the special meeting. Before the Facebook posts. Before the inspections. Before the 90-day letters. The buyers weren't reacting. They were preparing. That evening, Carter drove past the clubhouse. The lights inside were still on. Carol Ann's SUV sat in the parking lot. Doug's golf cart was parked beside it. Through the window, he could see several board members gathered around a table. No public notice, no agenda posted outside, no homeowners invited. Just another closed-door meeting. One board member stood up and walked into the hallway. Not angry, uncomfortable. Doug followed him. The conversation lasted less than a minute. The board member returned to the room, looking down at the floor. Doug smiled and patted him on the shoulder before heading back inside. Carter stayed in his truck. His phone lit up. A message from Lisa. One screenshot. A state business filing. Registered agent? Emily Fletcher. Carol Ann Fletcher's sister-in-law. Carter zoomed in. Same post office box. Same mailing address. Same family name. He looked back through the clubhouse window. Carol Ann was still inside, laughing. The company had been created 7 weeks earlier. By the first week of October, Carter stopped counting the for sale signs. He started counting price reductions instead. Every morning brought another notification. Price improvement. Price reduced. Motivated seller. The words changed. The meaning didn't. Someone was losing money. Fast. Carter drove through River Ridge before sunrise. 3 cabins that had listed above $450,000 were now below $420,000. Another had cut its asking price for the 3rd time in 2 weeks. The Reynolds cabin sold first. Now contractors worked there every day. Fresh lumber sat stacked beside the garage. A dumpster filled the driveway. Whoever bought it wasn't moving in. They were rebuilding it. Across the road, another cabin sat dark. Empty porch. Moving truck gone. Under contract. The neighborhood no longer felt like a mountain community. It felt like inventory. His phone rang. Mark Ellison. Carter could tell from his voice something had changed. My bank ordered a new appraisal. Carter pulled his truck to the side of the road. What happened? Mark laughed quietly. The same exhausted laugh Carter had heard before. They came in $80,000 lower. Silence. Mark bought his cabin for $485,000. His mortgage balance was still $438,000. The new appraisal estimated the property at $405,000. If he sold today, he wouldn't just lose money. He'd owe the bank more than $30,000. Before commissions, before closing costs, before moving expenses. I can't afford to leave, Mark said. But I can't afford to stay either. Carter looked through his windshield. 3 cabins, 3 price cuts, 1 neighborhood. The damage wasn't theoretical anymore. It had numbers. That afternoon, Lisa called. You need to hear this. She put another owner on speaker. His name was Robert Whitman. He and his wife planned to retire the following year. Their cabin wasn't a vacation home. It was their retirement account. We applied for a home equity line in August, Robert said. The bank called this morning. The application had been suspended. Too many active listings, too many recent price reductions, too much uncertainty. The lender wanted to wait. His wife had planned to use that money to help their daughter pay for graduate school. Now it was gone. Not because they missed payments, not because they had debt, because their neighborhood suddenly looked unstable. Carter hung up and stared at the clubhouse across the street. Carol Ann kept talking about property values. But banks didn't care about promises. Banks cared about numbers, and the numbers were getting worse every week. By noon, the River Ridge Facebook group exploded again. Another pinned post, another polished graphic, another message from Carol Ann. Short-term market adjustments create long-term community stability. The comments filled instantly. One owner wrote, I've lost $60,000 in 3 weeks. Another, my refinance was denied yesterday. A third, who pays the difference if we owe the bank after selling? Carter refreshed the page 10 minutes later. Every comment was gone. Only supportive messages remained. Doug Hensley replied to one of them. The board cannot be responsible for individual investment outcomes. The post received dozens of likes. Carter closed the app. His hands shook with anger. Across the parking lot, Emily waved him over. She held her phone toward him. A picture of the community bulletin board outside the clubhouse. 6 new compliance inspections. 6 addresses. Carter recognized every one. Mountain views, corner lots, high rental income. He called Lisa. 20 minutes later, she arrived carrying the same map she had shown him days earlier. But now there were new markings. Red circles, blue squares, yellow notes. She laid it across the hood of his truck. Red circles marked the highest performing rental cabins. Blue squares marked owners with active mortgages. Yellow notes marked upcoming inspections. The colors overlapped almost perfectly. Lisa looked up. They're not choosing who rents. She pointed at the map. They're choosing who can't afford to wait. Carter followed her finger. Every owner receiving inspections depended on their cabin's value. Retirement, college tuition, mortgage refinancing, rental income, equity. Every owner exempt from inspections had something else in common. No mortgage, no urgency, no pressure to sell. A golf cart rolled slowly past them. Doug, clipboard in hand, coffee in the other. He glanced at the map, then at Carter, then at Lisa. No surprise, no concern. Just the same calm expression, as if he had seen this exact pattern before. Robert Whitman walked out of the clubhouse, carrying an envelope, his shoulders slumped. Doug stopped him, said something Carter couldn't hear. Robert shook his head. Doug spoke again, calm, measured, professional. Robert handed him the envelope, then walked away. When Carter caught up to him near the parking lot entrance, Robert looked defeated. What was that? Robert held up the empty envelope. My appeal request. Carter frowned. You filed one? This morning. What happened? Robert looked back toward the clubhouse. Doug said the board can't delay community improvements because of individual financial situations. The exact same phrase, word for word, like he'd said it before, many times. Robert climbed into his truck. I spent 20 years building equity in that cabin. He looked toward the ridge where another for sale sign had appeared overnight. Now I'm watching it disappear, one price cut at a time. His truck pulled away. Carter looked down at the map again. Red, blue, yellow. Different colors. Same addresses. His phone buzzed. 3 Zillow notifications. 3 different cabins. 3 new price reductions. All within 60 seconds. The next board meeting appeared on the community calendar with less than 24 hours' notice. No agenda, no homeowner questions, no public comments. Just 2 words. Executive session. By then, 11 cabins had accepted offers. 8 had already closed. Another 4 owners had received compliance inspection notices. Every morning brought new price reductions. Every afternoon brought another moving truck. River Ridge no longer felt like a neighborhood. It felt like an auction. Carter parked across from the clubhouse 30 minutes before the meeting. He wasn't alone. Chris sat in his truck near the entrance. Robert Whitman stood beside his SUV with his arms crossed. Lisa arrived carrying coffee for everyone. Nobody talked much. They just watched. One by one, board members walked inside. Most avoided eye contact. Doug arrived last. Clipboard under one arm, coffee in the other. Same calm expression. Business as usual. Then Carter noticed Sarah Nguyen. She wasn't walking toward the clubhouse. She was walking toward him. She looked nervous. She handed him a folded sheet of paper. I shouldn't have copied this. Before Carter could respond, she turned and walked away. Carter unfolded the page. Meeting attendance. 6 weeks earlier. The closed-door meeting. The one nobody remembered being notified about. Carol Ann Fletcher, Doug Hensley, Tom Bradley, Daniel Mercer, Olivia Ross. The last 2 names meant nothing to Carter, until Lisa leaned closer. Those are the Smoky Peak representatives. Nobody spoke. The buyers had attended the meeting. Before the rule existed. Not after. Before. His phone buzzed. Chris. They're at my cabin. 20 minutes later, Carter pulled into Chris's driveway. Doug stood beside the golf cart, clipboard in hand. A management company employee photographed vehicles parked near the garage. Chris waited on the porch steps, arms crossed, jaw clenched. They said they need to verify occupancy. Doug smiled politely. Routine compliance review. Chris pointed across the road. The Reynolds cabin sat wide open. Workers carried new cabinets through the front door. Fresh paint cans lined the driveway. Nobody photographed their cars. Nobody checked their license plates. Nobody asked questions. The rules only seemed to matter before the sale, never after. Doug noticed Carter watching. The board has a responsibility to protect the community. Carter glanced back at the Reynolds cabin. 3 cabins sold, 3 renovations already underway. The neighborhood looked less stable than it had 2 weeks earlier. Doug followed his gaze. Change always feels uncomfortable. Then he wrote something else on the clipboard. Another note, another check mark, business as usual. By lunchtime, another rumor spread through River Ridge. A 4th cabin had accepted an offer. All cash, 5-day closing, 10% below asking. The owner canceled the weekend open house. There was no point anymore. Lisa called while Carter drove back from town. I talked to the listing agent. What did he say? He thought you already knew. Carter tightened his grip on the steering wheel. Knew what? The investors contacted him before the first notices went out. Silence. He said they wanted to know which owners might need to sell quickly. Carter pulled onto the shoulder. When was this? About a month ago. A month. Before the special meeting. Before the Facebook posts. Before the inspections. Before the 90-day letters. The buyers weren't reacting. They were preparing. That evening, Carter drove past the clubhouse. The lights inside were still on. Carol Ann's SUV sat in the parking lot. Doug's golf cart was parked beside it. Through the window, he could see several board members gathered around a table. No public notice, no agenda posted outside, no homeowners invited, just another closed-door meeting. One board member stood up and walked into the hallway. Not angry, uncomfortable. Doug followed him. The conversation lasted less than a minute. The board member returned to the room looking down at the floor. Doug smiled and patted him on the shoulder before heading back inside. Carter stayed in his truck. His phone lit up. A message from Lisa. One screenshot. A state business filing. Registered agent. Emily Fletcher. Carol Ann Fletcher's sister-in-law. Carter zoomed in. Same post office box. Same mailing address. Same family name. He looked back through the clubhouse window. Carol Ann was still inside, laughing. The company had been created 7 weeks earlier. Tom Bradley didn't answer Carter's calls. Not that night, not the next morning. By noon, his cabin listing showed a status update. Under contract. Less than 18 hours after it hit the market. No open house, no price changes, no public showing. Just another fast sale. By then, nobody in River Ridge seemed surprised anymore. Fast sales had become normal. That was the problem. Lisa arrived at Carter's cabin carrying 2 coffees and her laptop. She looked exhausted. So, Tom resigned? Carter nodded. And listed his cabin? Lisa set the coffees on the kitchen table. Not exactly. She turned the laptop toward him. County records. Tom Bradley still owned the property. The buyer wasn't an LLC. It wasn't an individual either. The cabin had been placed under contract by a trust. Smoky Mountain Heritage Trust. Neither of them had heard of it. Lisa clicked another tab. Registered mailing address. P.O. Box 872. Carter stared at the screen. Different names, different companies, same destination. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. One text message. One photo attachment. Nothing else. Carter opened it. A stack of board documents spread across a table. The top page read, Executive Session, Draft Minutes. A second message appeared. Check page 4. Lisa looked up. Who sent that? Carter didn't answer. He was already scrolling. Attendance list, budget discussion, parking enforcement updates. Then page 4. One heading had been highlighted: projected acquisition opportunities following owner-occupancy transition. Neither of them spoke. Beneath the title sat a chart: projected market reduction, 10 to 15%. Expected seller participation, 12 to 15 owners. Estimated acquisition window, 90 days. The same deadline from the notices. Carter looked toward the ridge outside his kitchen window. 11 cabins had already accepted offers. The document hadn't predicted a possibility. It had predicted a result. Lisa kept reading. Another section. Priority properties. No addresses, just owner numbers. Mark Ellison. The Whitmans. Carter Whitaker. Carter stopped scrolling. Outside, a moving truck rolled slowly past the cabin. Another family leaving. Another sale. Another prediction coming true. At the bottom of the page sat a handwritten note: monitor refinancing activity. Carter thought about Mark's appraisal, Robert's frozen credit line, the inspections, the parking logs. The board hadn't just identified owners who rented their cabins. They had identified owners who couldn't afford to wait. Lisa scrolled further. A smaller note near the bottom of the page caught her attention. Conflict disclosures to be addressed in final session. Addressed. Not completed, not attached. Addressed. Next to Tom Bradley's name, someone had written 2 words by hand. Objected strongly. The handwriting looked rushed, added later, almost like someone wanted it noticed. His phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. One final message. Tom kept copies. Carter set the phone down. The room went quiet. Then he looked back through the kitchen window. Doug's golf cart rolled slowly toward the clubhouse. Carol Land stepped out of her SUV. No folders, no paperwork, no urgency. She carried a bottle of champagne. Doug held the clubhouse door open for her. She said something Carter couldn't hear. Doug laughed. Carol Land pointed toward the ridge, toward the cabins, toward the for sale signs. Doug nodded, like they were discussing numbers, not families. Carol Ann turned for a moment. Her eyes drifted toward Carter's cabin. She smiled. Not because she knew about the draft minutes, because she thought she had already won. Then she disappeared inside. The clubhouse door closed behind her. Doug's golf cart remained outside. A clipboard sat clipped to the windshield. Carter could only make out one word: completed. His phone buzzed again. Price reduced. Then another. And another. 3 cabins. 3 new price cuts. All within minutes. Lisa closed the laptop. Neither of them spoke. On the kitchen table sat the draft minutes. Page 4 remained open. Projected acquisition opportunities. Expected seller participation. 12 to 15 owners. 11 had already accepted offers. At the bottom of the page, beneath Tom Bradley's handwritten note, sat a blank line reserved for signatures. Tom's space was still empty. The notice appeared at 6:12 the next morning. Not in an email, not on the Facebook group. Taped to the clubhouse door. A single sheet of paper. Special community meeting. Mandatory attendance. By noon, photos of the notice had spread through River Ridge. For the first time in weeks, nobody talked about selling. Nobody talked about inspections. Nobody talked about price reductions. They talked about the draft minutes. Someone else had copies. Not just Carter. Not just Lisa. By sunset, the clubhouse parking lot was full. Pickup trucks lined both sides of the road. Owners stood in small groups holding printed screenshots. County records, property listings, inspection notices. People who had barely spoken to each other for years now compared dates, offers, appraisals, closing deadlines, patterns. Carter spotted Mark near the entrance. The Whitmans stood beside him. Chris arrived carrying a folder thick enough to need both hands. Nobody looked defeated anymore, just angry. Doug stepped out first, clipboard under his arm. Same calm expression, same measured walk. Business as usual. Then he saw the crowd. For the first time, he stopped. Just for a second. Carol Ann followed him outside. No smile, no confidence. She looked at the parking lot, at the owners, at the folders in their hands, at the printed copies of the draft minutes. Someone held up the page with the highlighted title, Projected Acquisition Opportunities Following Owner-Occupancy Transition. Nobody said a word. They didn't have to. Carol Ann walked directly to the podium inside the clubhouse. Doug stayed close beside her. The room filled quickly. Every seat, every wall. People stood in the hallway. Others watched through the windows. Carol Ann adjusted the microphone. The board understands recent changes have created concerns. No one interrupted. That seemed to bother her more. She looked toward Doug. He nodded. Routine. Practiced. Then Tom Bradley walked in. The room went silent. He wore jeans instead of a suit. No tie. No board badge. Just a man carrying a cardboard box. He placed it on the table beside the microphone. Inside were binders, meeting packets, printed emails, parking logs. Tom looked at Carol Ann, then at Doug. Neither of them moved. I objected. His voice carried across the room. I objected every time. Nobody spoke. Tom opened one of the binders. I told the board these policies would force owners to sell below market value. He opened another. I warned them the inspections targeted owners with active mortgages. Another. I asked for conflict disclosures. Carol Ann finally stepped forward. This meeting is out of order. Tom didn't look at her. He lifted a single page from the box. The attendance sheet. The same one Sarah had copied. 2 representatives from Smoky Peak Property Group. 1 board president. 1 closed-door meeting. Tom placed it on the table. Then he stepped back. He didn't need to say anything else. The room connected the dots on its own. Questions came from every direction. When did the investors attend? Why weren't owners notified? Why were some cabins exempt? Who approved the inspections? Doug tried to answer. Carol Ann tried to restore order. Nobody listened. An attorney sitting in the second row finally stood. Nobody knew who invited him. He placed a letter on the table. The room went quiet. Carol Ann read the first page. Her expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough. The first crack. The attorney looked around the room. The board approved a policy affecting property rights during executive sessions that were never properly noticed to owners. He placed one hand on the attendance sheet. Under Tennessee law, executive sessions cannot be used to approve actions that financially benefit board affiliates without proper disclosure. Nobody moved. He slid the letter closer to Carol Ann. The owner-occupancy policy, the inspections, and the acquisition discussions described in these records are now subject to legal challenge. Doug leaned forward to read the letter. For the first time all evening, neither of them spoke. Tom closed the last binder. Outside, the golf cart sat empty, the clipboard still clipped to the windshield. The word at the top remained visible. Completed. Nobody touched it. By the end of the meeting, the board voted to suspend all compliance inspections. The owner-occupancy rule would be reviewed by independent counsel. No new sales could be forced. No additional notices would be sent. Owners slowly walked back into the parking lot. Not celebrating. Just breathing again. As Carter reached his truck, he looked across the road. Someone was pulling a for sale sign out of the ground. Doug walked past the golf cart without taking the clipboard. Carol Ann stayed inside the clubhouse, alone. The sign disappeared into the bed of a pickup truck. One by one, the lights inside the clubhouse went dark.